So what's happened to Ireland is the same as what's happening to all countries around the world. And what's happening is that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, the Bank of International Affairs and Settlements, a global government is now orchestrating openly what's allowed in any country. And it's true, the Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century, that this plan was laid out, agreed upon by all the governments, and began to be implemented as something that seems to be for the good of the planet and for the good of nature, to protect nature from what otherwise business would do. But it's actually business that have set this up. So if you look into who created the United Nations comes out of the League of Nations, and the League of Nations comes out of World War II. World War II comes as a result of World War I. So you can look into the Corbett Report, has a very good video on the creation of World War I and II and the circumstances that brought about World War I and II. And that World War II were created on purpose. I would say myself, it's pretty obvious that if you're creating and developing loads of weaponry to fight other countries, you need wars in which to sell those weapons. And if you're researching and developing weapons, you need war to put all the finance and people's effort in fighting those wars is also the research and development for developing those weapons. So in World War II, we went from just tanks and machine guns to flying ships and radars and cybernetics and computers and infrastructures and monetary interests backing both sides of the wars. So the main creation out of World War I and II was the United Nations. And it's the Rockerfellas who bought the building for the United Nations. So you have big money and the manipulation of the Western world at the very heart of the creation of the United Nations. And Agenda 21 was created out of a world summit called the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. And that gathering was brought together by a guy called Maurice Strong, and Maurice Strong again is a representative of the Rockerfellas. So the connection between the UN, Agenda 21 and the Rockerfellas is really clear. It just takes researching and looking at the history to know it. So Agenda 21 was signed up to by all the countries in the world, and it allows that those countries have to develop sustainably towards the goals of Agenda 21. And it seems like it's to protect nature. But as it turns out these days, it becomes obvious that it's taking control of nature. So the UN hasn't been stopping any wars from happening. And the UN aren't really protecting nature. That's evident by everything that's happened since the United Nations was created. They've not been saving the world from human folly. They've been doing all the administration work in the background to take control of human folly and direct it. So the big fear these days is what's been directing is whoever controls all the governments in the world and whoever's aggregated and created this system, whoever's been working for hundreds of years to create this outcome, that their intent is really directed against the planet and against all of us people on the planet and against all in life on the planet. And so it's immortal on some level, it's non-mortal, it's not suffering from the generations of confusion that we all have as humans. It takes what it's imagining very seriously, and it follows through some blueprint very step by step and meticulously. And by the time the 5G is getting deployed over the last 3 years and for the next 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 years, it looks like whoever's made this plan has got it all sewn up. And so whatever's gone on in Australia over the last 10 or 20 years, like in Ireland over the last 10 or 20 years, or all over the world for the last 10 or 20 years, what's going on is an acceleration in global governance and global industrial complex, and the agreements between all these governments that they're all working to the same plan and working in concert together. They're all separate instruments, but they're all working in harmony. So again, it's paranoid to think that they're all not working for the good. But then the evidence of what's going on in the world is it's not good what's happening at this stage, as far as I can see. So Max Igan's put out some great videos there before Christmas about how come and how Australia's been burned. Of how the droughts are man-made droughts deliberately caused. And how geo-engineering is involved in steering away the rain so that the rain doesn't fall on Australia. So there's cloud seeding that's well recognised as existing, where you can put nano-dust into the sky and then the water forms around those nanoparticles. And the water continues to condense until it gets heavy enough that it has to fall from the clouds. And so messing around with the weather has been going on for over 100 years using technology. And so loads of the technology that's being placed all around the planet is actually technology which is being used to affect the weather. And so look up words like ionospheric heater and HARP and all those things that most people listening to this will know, I suppose. Well, there's a work of a woman called Elana Freeland. Elana Freeland. You find her out on Facebook or on YouTube. And her book research essentially shows that what's going on with 5G is it's intensifying all what the military have already been building on the planet so far in terms of radiation and frequencies. And the upshot of all of that says that our atmosphere is becoming ionized, that there is electromagnetic energy pulsing on all frequencies and all bandwidths and all levels beyond our hearing. And they're all affecting our brain, they're affecting our psyche, and it's working in cahoots with what we're absorbing off the screens and how the internet is taking over inside in our psyche and becoming a third person present in our own minds. So it's both outside of us on our screens, but it's also inside, kind of percolating through our minds. And then potentially it actually has a voice. It's actually overall saying something to us. It's persuading us and nudging us and educating us to understand it, to begin to think like it thinks. So there's an osmosis going on between humans and the artificial intelligence, or the entity behind artificial intelligence, if there is such a thing. So as you can see, it's quite hard to follow through with the thoughts of any of this, because the thoughts all divide off into all kinds of directions of maybes. And the history just goes back and back to, well, it's all this written history passed on to us by people who actually slaughtered us. This is all history written by the victors. The climate change people seem to trust science completely. The science says this and the science says that, and you can only trust it when it says this, because when it says that, it's been fueled by big oil. And the climate people don't want to recognise that big oil is behind their UN Agenda 21 and UN Agenda 2030. So what I'm witnessing is that people have been divided along their biases of what they want to believe, or are influenced to believe, or haven't thought deeply enough about to know what to believe. It's quite difficult to figure this stuff out, and to not become a ranting lunatic in the process. That's my kids home from school. I'll record more in a bit.